I don't want you to respond outwardly, but I want you to think inwardly. How many of you have ever been mistreated? Again, don't respond outwardly. Think about it inwardly. Probably most of us, maybe all of us would say we've been mistreated. Again, don't respond outwardly. I want you to think about it inwardly. If you have the opportunity where the individual or individuals that had hurt you, had mistreated you, had said something about you or done something negatively to you, and you had the opportunity, you had the power, you had the way to do something about it, to make them pay, what would you do? Again, don't respond outwardly. Think about it inwardly. Because I want to save you something, because some of you, you would be tempted, you would want to say the right thing outwardly. Outwardly, most of you know what you should say, what you should do. Well, we're supposed to do what Jesus would do. But inwardly, if we're being honest with ourselves today, maybe we would respond differently. Well, I'd let them have it. Both barrels are coming out. I mean, it's on like Donkey Kong. It's over, Rover. I mean, you're going to get revenge if you were just being honest with yourself. And we put the Sunday school answer aside and know what Pastor Len's looking for. If you had the opportunity, you would probably want to get revenge. Now, you may not choose to do so, but you'd probably think about it. Can we just be honest today and say that's probably how we would respond? But as we look at Joseph and as we finish our series on looking at the life of Joseph, Joseph had that opportunity. And let's see how Joseph responded. For those that haven't been with us the last few weeks, or maybe missed a week in there somewhere, I want to just make sure that we're all kind of on the same ground this morning as we look through Genesis chapter 47, the end of chapter 47, through chapter 50. There's quite a bit of territory in here, and we're not going to cover every single verse, but before we get to that, it's helpful to have common ground on the backstory. So it begins in Genesis chapter 37. We're introduced to Joseph. We're told in Genesis chapter 37 that Joseph is 17 years of age, and he has a dream. And then he has another dream, and the end of those two dreams, what they all come about is that his brothers, 10 older brothers, as well as his mom and dad, are going to bow down to him. They're going to surrender before him and acknowledge his power and God's favor on his life. Well, he's pretty excited about these dreams, and he tells his brothers, and he tells his father. They're not nearly as excited about his dream. In fact, the brothers despise him. Now, not just because of the dreams, there's some other family dynamics in there. And they hate him all the more, Scripture tells us. And they get an opportunity at the end of chapter 37 to sell him into slavery. They thought about taking his life, but they decided to just sell him into slavery. As we pick it up in chapter 39, a couple weeks ago, we saw that Joseph landed in the house of Potiphar. And Potiphar is the lead soldier for Pharaoh. He's the captain of the guard. He's way up there, and Joseph is working for him, and then there's false allegations by Potiphar's wife, and Joseph ends up in prison. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do anything to deserve being in prison, but he's in prison. And we followed through, and we looked at last week, his time in prison. And wouldn't you know it, he comes across a couple guys that had worked for the king, and they both have dreams, and Joseph interprets their dreams, and then they forget about him. And Joseph continues to go overlooked and forgotten. And we talked about last week, how do we respond, or how should we respond when we feel overlooked and forgotten. And then we ended last week, where we'll pick it up today, where Joseph is standing before the king because the king, Pharaoh, had a dream. And he was troubled by his dream. He couldn't sleep because of his dream. He had this dream that there were 7 fat and sleek cows coming up out of the Nile. And for those of you that are farmers and you have cattle, you can identify with this and go, wow, yeah, 7 fat, sleek, they're healthy, they are the best of the best. 7 cows coming out of the Nile, and he's thinking, hey, this is a good dream. But then there are 7 skinny, ugly cows, and he goes on to say, as he's recounting the dream, they're the ugliest cows I've ever seen in all of Egypt, because Egypt had been blessed. Egypt had been doing really well, and so their cows were in good shape. Their people were doing good, and their cows were doing good. But he has this dream about these 7 skinny, ugly cows, and these ugly cows go and eat the fat, sleek cows. But you couldn't tell any difference in the ugly cows. They're still ugly and they're still skinny. And he is just bothered by this dream. And so finally, the cupbearer who had been in prison and Joseph had interpreted his dream for him, said, you know what, I forgot there's this guy, he's able to interpret dreams. And so Pharaoh goes to Joseph and says, hey, I had this dream, can you interpret it? Joseph says, no, I can't do it, but God can. And we saw how Joseph knew that God was with him. Even though he could have felt like he was overlooked and forgotten, Joseph knew that God was with him. And as we pick up the story, it's important to remember that God is with us. And there's a big idea that I want you to catch this morning as we go through the rest of this story. Life with God offers a different perspective. When we're walking with God and we know that God is with us and we're with God, we can live from a different perspective, operate from a different perspective in life than those that don't know the Lord, than those that don't know God's presence with them day in and day out, that don't understand how awesome God is. You think of perspective, and just to give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about by perspective, here's a little picture. I didn't draw this, but it looks something like maybe I could have drawn something about like that, but there's one person on one side, and he looks at it, and he says, 4. And there's a person on the other side, and they are looking at it, and they say, 3. Well, which one's right? It depends on your perspective. And life is filled with perspective. We see things from certain angles. We look at life through the lens of our environment. We look at life through the lens of our culture, our family upbringing. We look at life through the lens of our political party. We look at life through a lot of different perspectives. But Joseph is looking at life through a vertical perspective. You see, often in life, we're confined to seeing things from a horizontal perspective. And even that can offer different viewpoints on things, different ideas. Joseph is able to see things from a heavenly perspective, knowing that God is with him. He's living with God, and when you live with God, it offers a different perspective. As those who follow Christ, we should see life differently than those who don't. Can we agree with that today? We should see life differently than those who don't know the Lord. They don't understand His power. They don't understand that He is the first and the last, the beginning and the end. That He has no beginning and He'll have no end. They don't understand that God is sovereign, that He's over all, that God is in charge. And so they operate in life, they go through life oblivious to that perspective. Joseph, on the other hand, lived with a vertical perspective, understanding who God is and that God is in charge. Even when things are going rough and tough and not the way you would like them to go, Joseph was experiencing that. He still knew that God was God. And he trusted him. And that's what we see as we pick it back up and follow along the story in Genesis chapter 41. And we'll pick it up in verse 28. Love for you to follow along. As I said earlier, we're going to skip a lot of verses. As you look at this chunk of Scripture, there's a lot to cover. Chapter 41 through chapter 50. Again, I'm not going to read every single verse. I'll let you kind of read in between. I will fill in some blanks. I'll connect some dots. But we'll pick it up with chapter 41, verse 28. It is just as I said to Pharaoh, this is Joseph speaking, God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, those 7 fat cows. The land is going to be doing great. You Egyptians, wow. God is going to bless. He's going to pour out abundantly on the land for 7 years. But 7 years of famine will follow them, the 7 skinny cows. And he goes on to basically say that it's going to be so bad that you will have forgotten the 7 good years. Like, you won't remember them because it is going to be so severe of a drought. So he interprets the dream, and then he gives some advice. He goes on and says, here's what I would do. And now, verse 33, let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. So knowing this, God's giving you a heads up. Here's what's to come in the next 14 years. 7 good years followed by 7 really bad years. So with that in mind, you need to find somebody that you can put in charge to oversee a great undertaking. Because for 7 years, with this blessing, we need to set aside a lot of grain. A lot of stuff needs to be saved for those lean years. Yes, it's going to be fat years, but don't use up everything. Don't take that for granted, because God has given us a heads up. There's going to be 7 years that follow that are going to be really, really bad. And so you need to have somebody in charge that can lead other people, that can have other people underneath them, that can pull all of this together and set aside some things for later on. And so Joseph goes ahead and says that to Pharaoh. And Joseph doesn't say to Pharaoh, you know what, I'm your guy, I've got a plan, I've got it all figured out. He just says, here's what I would do. This is what you need to do. It doesn't volunteer for the job, doesn't tell Pharaoh that he's the best candidate for the job. Pharaoh's able to see that, though, and says, hey, as we pick it up in verse 39, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. There's something for us to see right here. We'll come back to this later. But Joseph is put in charge of the whole land of Egypt. At the time, Egypt is the greatest nation on earth. The wealthiest, the most respected, the most feared, they are it. And Joseph, a Hebrew, non-Egyptian, somebody that had been taken as a slave and then put into prison for over 2 years, is now all of a sudden lifted up to second in command. Only the king is above him. This sounds a little bit familiar as we go back to our scripture, back into chapter 39. We see that Joseph worked his way up and became in charge of all of Potiphar's household. Potiphar said, other than me, it's you. All I'm going to worry about is eating. You're going to take care of everything else in my house. Then he's thrown in prison, and the warden ends up doing the same thing. He's like, you know what? I'm not going to worry about anything else. You've got it under control. You've worked your way up. You've proven yourself to be trustworthy. You're a great organizer. You make things happen. You get it done, and I trust you. I believe in your abilities, and I trust your character. You're competent, and you're filled with great character. You got the job. You take care of it. But he's still in prison. And now all of a sudden he's the second in command of all of Egypt. And Pharaoh goes ahead and gives him some bling. He gives him this great necklace. He gives him his own ring, which was a special ring because the king would use that as their signature. Like things happened when the king sealed it with their ring. Only the king could do that. But the king's like, you know what? I trust you, and you need to make things happen. And I know you're going to have a plan, and God's with you, so you just make it happen. You sign it as if I'm signing it. Now, I'm still in charge. I still sit on the throne, but I trust you. Gives him a ring, gives him the necklace, gives him a chariot. He rides the second limo behind the king. Wherever they go, he's second in command. The second limo, or second chariot, we should say, that's Joseph. And all of the king's men, they're coming with the chariots and everything. They're going ahead of Joseph. And as Joseph comes through the towns, everybody bow to Joseph. Joseph is the great one. And wow, he went from slave to prison to all of Egypt bowing before him. And then Pharaoh not only gives them all that, Pharaoh's like, you know what, I'm going to hook you up with a wife. And so he gives them a wife, somebody that would have been prestigious, a daughter of one of the leaders of the country and well-respected. And so Joseph's got all this going for him. And we pick it up as we go back to Scripture. Verse 46, Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. How old was he when we first met him? 17. 13 years later, you hold on to that. 13 years later, Joseph entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. So we see this in verse 51. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh. Everybody say Manasseh. Doesn't that just sound like a great name? Manasseh. I don't know. It doesn't sound like a great name. But if you look at its meaning, it's filled with something awesome. He says, Manasseh, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. Those 13 years of hardship, those 13 years where I was mistreated, I was sold out by my brothers. I was dead to them. They sold me into slavery. I was falsely accused, thrown into prison. He's made me forget all of that. Now, had Joseph truly forgotten everything? No. Can we truly forget everything? No. Only the things we don't want to forget, right? Those are the things we forget. Like, where did I put my keys? But God had blessed Joseph, and God had brought Joseph along, and so he looked at things from a different perspective. He didn't just see it from a horizontal perspective. He saw it from a vertical perspective. He didn't just look at what he had lost. He looked at what he had gained. He didn't just look at what he didn't have. He looked at what he had. More important, he looked at who he had all along. And he says, God has made me forget. And his second son, he named Ephraim and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. Instead of just suffering, God has made me fruitful. Different perspective. And we continue on. And we pick it up. Chapter 42, verse 1. So all of the land did have, in Egypt, did have great abundance for those 7 years, but it was followed by 7 years of famine, just as God had said it would. 2 years into the famine, all of the nation around them, not just Egypt, is hurting, but everybody around them is hurting. As you look at the last part of chapter 41, everybody from everywhere was coming to them because word got out that they had food, including Joseph's family. Wouldn't you know it, they're hungry too, and they need food. To get food, who do they have to see? Joseph. But they don't even know where Joseph is. They surely don't expect to find him in the palace of the king. They surely don't expect to be the one that he would be the one that they would have to ask for food. Basically to save their lives. But that's exactly what takes place, but there's a lot that happens in between. Let's take a look. Chapter 42, verse 1. When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" Isn't that a great question by a dad? Why do you keep just looking at each other? He continued, "I've heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some food for us so that we may live and not die." Quit just sitting on your hands and twiddling your thumbs. Do something. Make yourselves useful. I want to ask, again, for an outward response. But parents, how many of you ever thought that or said that to your children? Would you make yourself useful? He says, go down there. So that's what they do. And as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. But he pretended to be a stranger. They don't recognize him. He recognizes them. They look pretty much the same. Again, they were older. People tend to not change as much the older in life, right? You change quite a bit from age 12 to 25, but you don't change a whole lot from like 25 to 45 or 45 to 65. And they were living in the same place, and they spoke the same language that they had before he was sold into slavery. But he's been living in Egypt for how long? 13 years. So he's been living in Egypt for 13 years, and now he's the second in command of all of Egypt. We need to know a couple things. One, he dressed like an Egyptian. When you're second in command of all of Egypt, you dress like an Egyptian. You're setting yourself in front of the rest of the nation as a representation of the king, so you're going to look the part. So he dressed like an Egyptian. He probably walked like an Egyptian, and he most certainly talked like an Egyptian. And some of you, when I said walk like an Egyptian, your mind went somewhere else. You're thinking of the Bengals, right? But he didn't portray himself. He didn't look like a Hebrew, and he didn't talk like a Hebrew, and they hadn't seen him for 13 years. They didn't recognize him. But he recognized them and decided to have a little fun with the situation. So he spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. So he goes on, and he says, "You know what, you're spies," and he gives them this test. He's like, "You know what, I'm not going to let you have more. I'll let you buy some grain, but you're not going to be free to buy and sell in the land until you can prove that you're not spies." And the only way that you can do that, they had told him about their father living back where they came from, as well as their youngest brother. They said, "There are 12 of us, but one is no more, and the other is still with our dad. The youngest is with our dad." Can you imagine that? They just told Joseph, like, one is no more. He's like, if you only knew. He's like, here's the test. You're going to leave one brother behind. One of you is going to have to stay in prison till the rest go back, and you bring your youngest brother back. And if you can bring your youngest brother back, that will prove to me that you're not spies, and you'll be free to buy and sell in the land. So, okay. So they're given grain. But Joseph has his steward put their money back in top of each of their bags. So they're returning with the grain that they had bought, but also the money that they had used to buy that grain, or the money that they were supposed to have used to buy that grain. And then they find out on their way home, oops, what's this? We've each got our money in the bag. We're going to be in trouble. And they go back to Dad and they tell Dad about the story. We met this guy and here's what he said. He said, you got to bring the youngest one back to me. And he made us leave Simeon behind. And Jacob is really distraught. He's like, are you guys trying to kill me? One son is already gone. Joseph is no more. Now Simeon is no more. And now you want to take Benjamin too? No way, no how, over my dead body. And so they sit and they do nothing for a while until food runs out. And Jacob says, hey, you guys, you got to go back and get more grain. And then, well, hey, we'd like to do that. But he said, and he was very clear, we can only get more grain if we bring our youngest brother back. So they take Benjamin with them. We pick it up. The men had been seated before him in the order of their ages. You see, when they're coming, Joseph tells his steward, hey, prepare a meal at my house. We're going to have a feast. And he has his brothers seated around the table by age. Interesting. There's sometimes we can look at people and have a pretty decent idea of who's older and who's younger. But you line up 11 brothers side by side and you're able to get every single one of them right. Can you imagine the odds in being able to do that? But yet, that's exactly what happens here. He puts them in order. And as they looked at each other in astonishment, they're like, what's going on here? And then not only did he seat him around the table, but he gives the youngest one, he gives Benjamin 5 times the amount of food. He's like, I'm going to load him up. Because we're full-blooded. These other brothers we're half-blooded. This is my full-blooded brother. And Joseph is overjoyed to see him. He's like, hey, they really brought him. But Joseph still has another test. He still wants to see if his brothers have changed. You see, there's something in this where forgiveness doesn't mean that we act like nothing ever happened. Forgiveness doesn't mean that we just say, oh, you know what? You broke my trust. Here you go. I completely trust you again. Trust has to be built initially, and when trust is broken, it has to be rebuilt. And so Joseph gives them another test. He sends them back. He said, hey, here's some more grain. But they were really nervous. They came before the steward and they see this meal and they're like, hey, just so you know, like when we left the first time, we had a bunch of money in our bags. All of our money was there, and we're not thieves or anything. He's like, hey, you know what? No big deal. Your God has given it to you. So that they were relaxed, and here they go back. But this time, before they leave, Joseph tells his steward this time, instead of putting all their money back in the bags, he said, you know what? My silver cup, the really special one that I like, that I use a lot, that one, put that one in the bag of the youngest. And then after they've left, chase after them and ask them why they would treat their Lord this way, their master this way, when he had been so kind to them. So sure enough, that's exactly what they do. He puts the silver cup in Benjamin's sack, and they are leaving, and the steward catches up with them and asks them, and finds that silver cup, and they are distraught. So they go back. They've got to answer before the second in command. Stand before Joseph. And they speak up. The older brothers speak up this time, and they say, you know what? We're all guilty. Treat us all the same. We'll all be your slaves. And Joseph says, no, just the one who's guilty. Benjamin. And Judah goes into this great speech, and you can look at it on your own, read it on your own, but he essentially says, you know what? Dad couldn't handle it if he lost another son, especially Benjamin. He lost his brother Joseph, and Dad hasn't been right since then. And if he lost Benjamin, this would be the end of Dad. We couldn't stand to let Dad go through something like that. So would you take me instead? Could I be the substitute? I know that the silver cup was found in Joseph's bag, or in Benjamin's bag, but would you take me instead and let Benjamin go free? And with that, Joseph sends everybody out of the room except for his brothers. Chapter 45, verse 1. Couldn't control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. Now let me ask you a question. What are you thinking the brothers are thinking at this time? The brothers that had sold him into slavery 13 years ago. The brothers that had told their dad that a wild animal must have killed him. Basically just let their dad come to the conclusion and go on without it. And for 13 years they had been saying, one is no more. He's dead. He was dead to them. And here they are standing face to face. And he's got full authority to do whatever he wants to do to those who had mistreated him 13 years before. The guys that were responsible for him being in slavery. And if you wanted to, you could say the guys that were responsible for him being in prison, because if he wouldn't have been sold into slavery, he wouldn't have been sold, or wouldn't have been falsely accused and thrown into prison. 13 years of his life. And he's got an opportunity to make them pay. But what does he do? He extends forgiveness. He operates out of grace and mercy. Verse 5, "And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." You see, Joseph was looking at it from a completely different perspective. They saw the horizontal. We did this, and oh man, we're in trouble, and we're sorry, and all of that. Joseph's like, that's okay. I see it from a vertical perspective. I see it from a different perspective. I've been walking with God, and God has shown me why I'm here. And they had this great reunion, and Dad and all the rest of the family, they all moved to Egypt, and it's like they're going to live happily ever after until Dad dies. And then the brothers are nervous again as we look in chapter 50. If you want to just take a look there, you can scan over and pick it up in chapter 50. Beginning with verse 15. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" It's like maybe he was just being nice to us for Dad's sake. And now Dad is gone, and we're feeling pretty nervous. So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins of the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God?" I love verse 20. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph saw things from a completely different perspective. You intended, but God intended. Three things that I want us to see as we walk with God, when we really know that God is with us and we're living out of a different perspective. The first thing is this. With God, we can trust the planner when we don't understand the plan. With God, we can trust the planner when we don't understand the plan. There are a lot of you out here that like to have a plan. You want to have a plan, and you want your plan to go according to your will, right? Okay, this is outward participation now. How many of you want a plan? You like to have a plan, and if somebody else has a plan, you want to know the plan. Because you may not agree with that plan, and you might have a better plan. But with God, we say, I trust the planner, even when I don't understand the plan. Because God is good, I'll trust Him. Because I know that God works in all things for the good of those. He works for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. So even though I don't understand the plan, and sometimes, frankly, I don't even like the plan, what I'm seeing of the plan, but I trust the planner. And as Joseph walked through these 13 years, you have to know there were times where he was thinking, I'm not really a fan of this plan. I'm not really feeling it, God. I'm not really seeing how this is going to lead to what you said you had for me. But I trust you. I trust you. And we shouldn't wonder when we don't understand God's plan in our lives. Because He was very clear in Isaiah. He told the prophet, and this was the word for the nation of Israel, my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. Again, it's important to operate, to live with that vertical perspective, knowing that God knows a lot more than we know. And until we come to that realization, and until we align our lives and live our lives out of that perspective, knowing that God knows a lot more than we know, and that God is doing a lot more than what we see or understand, and that God's plan is a whole lot better than we could ever come up with, even if we don't like it at the time, we'll miss out on what God wants to do and through us. But Joseph lived with that vertical perspective, and he trusted the planner even when he didn't understand the plan. The second thing that we can learn from Joseph is with God, our waiting time isn't wasted time. Again, audience participation, you can raise your hand. How many of you don't like waiting? Don't like waiting. So at Walmart, you're looking at whatever line you can get through, whatever line you think is going to go the fastest, and you have a little competition. Like, which one is it going to be? And if there's two of you, and you have two different carts or two different orders or whatever, like, okay, well, you think that line, I'm going to take this line, and we'll have a race. Because we don't want to wait. And that, like, 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, or you go through the fast food line, and like, this is supposed to be fast food. I've been sitting here for 2 minutes. You're wasting my time. And how many of you have ever sat and you're like, oh, this is such a waste of time. I should be doing something else. And maybe you've even found yourself playing video game. You know, this is such a waste of time. I should be doing something else. But Pastor Len said our waiting time isn't wasted time. So I guess play on. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying play video games all day long. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that God doesn't care how we spend our time. In fact, God's Word gives us a lot about how we spend our time. He talks about our time and our money, and a lot often He'll use both of those and how we're supposed to steward both of them well, because they're gifts from Him. Our money and our time both come from God, and so we're to steward them well. Scripture's very clear about that, but we see from Joseph that waiting time doesn't have to be wasted time. How long was Joseph in Egypt? It's not a trick question. 13 years. 13 years where Joseph could have been going, this is a waste of time. I'm better than this. God, surely there's more for me in life than this. Really? I'm a slave? This is wasted time. This is a waste of who I am and what I can do. You have to think that could have crossed Joseph's mind. Joseph was at a place that he didn't want to be, doing things that he didn't want to do. He's in Potiphar's house. If you're Joseph, that seems like wasted time. If you're Joseph, sitting in prison, could feel a whole lot like wasted time. But with God, waiting time isn't wasted time. With God, Joseph spent those times, those hours, those days, those months, years in Potiphar's house, trusting God and worshiping and honoring God with his life. And so he was competent in what he did. He may not be doing what he wanted to do, but he did it for God's glory. He may not be where he wanted to be and doing what he wanted to do, but he did it with character. Later on, he's in prison. He wasn't where he wanted to be doing what he wanted to do, but he served with competence. And he lived with character. And God was using that time to prepare him for what he would be doing 13 years later after we were first introduced to him. Because it was after leading a household and then leading a whole prison that Joseph would be in charge of leading a whole nation. Waiting time doesn't have to be wasted time with God. Some of you are in a waiting season. You're not where you would want to be, doing the things you would want to do. But can I encourage you to press into that instead of pulling back and saying, oh, this is just wasted time? Serve God where you're at. Live for God where you're at, in your home, in your business, whatever it may be, wherever you are, be there, and be there with everything you have, knowing that God is with you. And with God, we live from a different perspective, and so waiting time isn't wasted time. Third and final thing that I'll share with you from Joseph's story. With God, we can see past our past. This is so huge. Because many of us are still living in the past. We're still holding on to the hurts, the pain, the what ifs, the how comes. Those still have us hostage. I love that verse that we read about Joseph and his first son Manasseh. He says, God has made me forget. I don't have to live with this kind of a perspective. I can live with this kind of a perspective. And so I've forgotten that. I've moved past that. It doesn't mean that the hurt didn't happen. It didn't mean that it wasn't real. It didn't mean that there wasn't still a break in relationship. But Joseph was going to be able to push beyond that and live for God and not be held captive to the pain of the past. But too often, we pitch camp in the past. Too often, we hold on to those grudges, those hurts that we've encountered, those things that we've endured over the years. And it keeps us from seeing and living everything that God has for us, everything that He wants to do in and through us. This has been on my heart so strongly that we've made a change in the sermon series schedule that we were going to do. And so piggybacking on this sermon series, starting next week, Coach Carter and I are going to take 4 weeks to talk something about the grudge. Here's a little preview, a little primer video of what's to come. Some of you are holding on to something that God wants you to put down. And we're going to help walk through that the next 4 weeks. Because there are a lot of different things, different grudges, different hurts that we need to let go of. By God's grace, with God's help, just like Joseph did. As the ushers make their way forward, as we prepare to continue in worship through the giving of tithes and offerings, singing worship songs to the Lord about His goodness in our lives and how great He is. I wonder, though, today, have you been living with just a horizontal perspective? Or are you living with a vertical perspective? Are you trusting, are you leaning into the planner even when you don't understand the plan? Are you really trusting Him with everything? Are you letting God help you to see past your past? Live with that vertical perspective, knowing that God is a good God that does great things. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for your goodness. We thank you for your grace in our lives. We pray your blessing upon those that give and what they give, that it would be used for your honor and glory, and Lord, more than that we would be used for your honor and glory. And so it's